Our next plenary, I
Where's
think,
Tom
is
Barrett?
kind of comes from a very different perspective, from much more of a technical perspective, but I think one that's really critical in terms of the work that all of us do here. Our speaker is Tom Barrett, who's president of Alyeska Pipeline Service Company since 2011. Tom is a retired Coast Guard admiral, serving 35 years as a Coastie with multiple tours in Alaska and attaining the position of vice commandant, the #2 position in the Coast Guard. I should say, in Alaska, we love the Coast Guard. They have our backs all the time. He's also previously served as Deputy Secretary of the U.S. Department of Transportation and the first administrator of the U.S. Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration. So Tom's going to give a totally different perspective, but will give his wisdom from an operator's perspective on the Arctic experience. So welcome, Tom Barrett.
See if we can get the technology to work here. Good morning. I'm delighted to be with you. And Molly, congratulations, by the way. That's just a terrific accomplishment. And Byron, Tom, the prior presentation is really intriguing, and it ties together with what you're doing and what I'm going to say. As Molly noted, my heritage is Coast Guard. I want to start out with a little backdrop. This is an operator's perspective. You know, there are a lot of issues up here. There's issues of economic development, environmental protection, energy security, climate change, globalization, and I'm kind of stepped down a little below that in terms of operating in the Arctic and operating in the North Pacific, and talk about some of the lessons. And it's just things for you to think about if you're up here, whether you're doing scientific research, whether you're trying to do energy development, whether you're trying to develop communities, Uktiavik, so that people there have a better life. But I think it's all relevant. It's a harsh and fragile, you got a great theme, by the way. The ocean is harsh and fragile. The people that operate on the ocean, such as we just saw, are anything but fragile. You've got to be tough. There's a lot of grit involved in being in this space and operating successfully in it. I wanted to start out with a little history, though, from my, we'll come back. Michelle, stay with that for a second. Thank you. Coast Guard. You know, the first U.S. government vessel to officially visit Alaska was United States Revenue Cutter Service Cutter in 1865. That's the predecessor of the Coast Guard. That's prior to Alaska being purchased from Russia by Seward's Folly. And the vessel was the Shubrick. And the captain was a gentleman named Captain Charles Scammon. And Scammon had been a whaler, went in service with the Revenue Cutter Service, served for 30 years. The Shubrick came up originally as a flagship for an 1865 expedition with Western Union to lay a communications cable across the Bering Strait to Russia, 1865. They withdrew from the mission. They couldn't make it work. But what they did was continue their activities up here. And then in 1867, the first way of establishing presence in this new territory was the U.S. Revenue Cutter Service Lincoln again, which came up to establish a government presence, a U.S. government presence in Alaska. But Scammon, interestingly, after he had finished his Coast Guard career, wrote a well-known study, Marine Mammals of the Northwestern Coast. And he tied together what he had learned as a whaler, but also what he had learned sailing the northwestern coast of this territory then over a period of almost 30 years. And the Coast Guard has a long heritage and history up here. And it ties to science, which most people don't realize. The Revenue Cutter Barrett, which was one of the follow-on ships, they were up a lot. They were viewed as bringing a presence, a judicial presence, a law enforcement presence. They were active in, shutting down pelagic sealing and getting at some of the horrible conservation issues involved. But what's also not always recognized is the Coast Guard brought people like John Muir up here, okay, to do scientific research. This is back in the late 1800s. And Alex Hendrick and E.W. Nelson and I.C. Rossi, scientists, to expose them and have them start to develop knowledge about this great frontier, which was then Alaska. So that heritage, that service heritage, and today what we continue even with the energy industry up here, rests a lot on scientists and your work. And I'll come back and talk about that a little. But it's how all this stuff ties together is really remarkable. So, we're going to go, Michelle, I think you're a slide ahead of me still. Yeah, there you go. So, fragile and oceans are alive if you've been out on them, and we just heard a magnificent story and hopefully some more about a living ocean. Oceans are always alive, and this ocean, although it's often or a lot frozen, is alive. It's alive with a whole variety of life. And you don't want to lose that. It's fierce, but it's alive. And you intersect with that life. Okay. Inuit. There are people up here. They've been here for 10,000 years. When you speak with their communities, and I want to speak for Byron, they're talking about the next 10,000 years. We're going to be here. We're going to do some science. We're going to develop some energy. We're going to do what we do. They're planning to be here for another 10,000 years. Are we going to be here another 10,000 years? Is this going to be a sustainable environment 10,000 years from now? But again, that's always on our mind, certainly on my mind, certainly on the Coast Guard's mind, but also on the mind of a company like ours who operates up here. We need to be able to operate in ways that respect the values and help, to the extent we can, the development of the people who were here before we came. And that's a conscious effort. I take a lot of pride at the company I work for. We have fundamentally been supporting the Alaska Native Science and Engineering program here for many years, ANSEP, STEM programs. Our workforce is over 20% Alaska Native. And that's not an overnight accomplishment, that's a sustained effort. But it's the ability to find ways to help people straddle the cultural values they want to hold on to, and also the 21st century, 22nd century, the 23rd century. It's tough. The reason I want to say it, I'm going to talk about operations, but all these things are backdrops for operations. And we don't lose sight of them. There are people here. I pay a lot of attention to our people. But when we talk about the oceans and the living oceans, it is not just the life in the oceans. It's the lives of the people, circumpolar actually, the lives of the people who live on and depend on those oceans. I don't want to lose sight of that, and we try not to. So, go back. I'm going to show this clip in a second, but we talk about the Arctic, the ocean, Arctic Circle. I was up at Dead Horse Thursday, and I went down to our pump station 4, which is in the Brooks Range, just north of the Brooks Range, and then down to 5, which is just south of the Brooks Range. But it was ironic to me that I'm heading toward the Arctic Circle, but I'm heading south. I've got to go south to cross the Arctic Circle. That's the world we inhabit. And we talk about the fragile ocean. The environment we inhabit, and I'm talking specifically our pipeline operations. I'll come back and talk about the Coast Guard in a couple of minutes. And you've got marine traffic, you've got people sailing up there, you've got shipping. But it's anything but fragile. I don't know if you can show that clip. This is Pump Station 1. There's a guy over there on the right. I don't know if that movie's going to work, you think, Michelle? This is what winter looks like up in our neighborhood. There you go. We're 365, 7 by 24. We can operate in that environment. We're very careful about how we operate in that environment. So you have fog, you have ice, you have wind, you have snow, you have mud, and you have it in ways that are just tough to manage. You have dark, which is a bigger factor both for people and operations than most people realize. It's the Arctic, right? If you're there, you're going to have to deal with this. This is kind of a repair job we were working on here a couple of years ago. The Sag River, if you can see the little arrow going to the center, that's where our pipeline is, and the river is way over to the right. All this area was flooded 2 years ago, underwater. The river decided to change its course. You had a very early, very sudden, very hard runoff. Shut down the road for a couple of weeks. All of a sudden, all of the logistics that come up that road stop. We had to drop river weights to protect our line in some very tough conditions. And now we're going in and repairing dikes even this summer. Elevating, State Department of Transportation's elevating the Dalton Highway up there by about 8 feet. But it's an environment. We need to be able to operate safely in that. This is the other end of the pipeline. This is Valdez. And if you look at the picture up on the left, you see those little dots? They're people, okay? And what they're doing is standing up on, we have 14 tanks down there. They're each about an acre in size, okay? And you can see what they're, a little closer look up of, we're moving about 500,000 barrels of oil now. Line moved about 2.1 million. When we were moving 2 million barrels, the oil, it comes in hot, comes in about 108 degrees out of Prudhoe, cools as it goes down the line, but it's colder now, okay? So what used to snow in Valdez, is a heavy snowfall area, used to naturally shed off those tanks. It doesn't anymore, okay? It doesn't shed. So in order to keep the snow loads on the tanks, if it's a heavy snowfall winter, which we occasionally get, in Valdez, we've got to put people on the tanks to shovel. And if you notice, they're using manual tools. Well, what are these? They're oil tanks. They're vents. You get hydrocarbon vapor. Risk, right? We can't take the risk that we have flammable sources up on top of those tanks. So my point simply being, you have to be able to operate in that. And people are tough and smart and capable, and we're very careful about how we do it. But this is the Arctic. This is actually Valdez, but it's an environment that's different. This is another aspect of our operations. This is what our pipeline looks like up in the area of the Denali Fault. It's designed to, it's seismic, right? And you've got some seismologists, I'm guessing, here. But you see it's on slides. It withstood a 7.8 Richter earthquake, 2004. It's designed to, it was brilliantly designed. You get vertical movement and lateral movement. But that's important to us. We work very closely with the University of Alaska Fairbanks Geophysical Institute on seismic issues. And actually, this whole pipeline is censored. And we're one of the earliest sources of information on any earthquake anywhere in the state because the line is censored. And that reads right into the university and generates some of the reports you see. But we have to be able to withstand that, right, and operate safely in that environment. This is, again, kind of Arctic. This is up by Pump Station 7 2 years ago. It's another little aspect of our operation. I'll come back to the oceans. But again, fires are a point of life. This year was a good fire year. I'd say good. It was not a bad fire year in Alaska. It was terrible down in the northwest United States. But again, fire is not a big threat to the pipeline itself. It is a big threat to, like, say, a pump station or a valve, stuff above ground. We get great support from the fire service. They're very helpful. In this case, they did a lot to help us protect basically Pump Station 7. But that's just part of the environment that we deal with. This is starting to move in your world. What that is a little handheld radio. It's part of our ART system, okay? So we have microwave. That's our primary comms tool. We have fiber optic backup. And some places around Prudhoe you can get cell phone. You don't have cell phone coverage up in the Brooks Range where we are. In order to operate safely, we actually maintain our own radio system with towers. It's expensive and challenging, but we need to have communications along our system, reliable communications all the time, 7 by 24. If you're operating in the Arctic, one of your biggest challenges is communications. If you sail away from the dock, I love the fact there's no point sitting there, but if you're going out on that ocean or going out on that ice, All those satellite systems, when they get in polar areas, are just not as reliable and may not even provide the coverage. It's a high latitude issue. And it hasn't been solved yet. What I'm offering you is when you think about where you're going, I see people, someone, when I was flying down the other day, a bicyclist coming down the Hall Road, I'm thinking, I wonder if they know that when they go another 30 miles, if they have a problem, there's no way they're going to be able to call for help, because that little cell phone they have, there's nobody's going to answer it, because there's no coverage. Communications is using. So we invest heavily in that, pay a lot of attention to it. Military certainly does, Coast Guard does, but it's shaky up here. Now people are investing and people are bringing communications in and bringing fiber optic in and getting out to villages with them. It's a long way from solid, I just offer that to you. But we maintain our own radio systems just so that if we have a person in trouble or we have an issue, we can respond to it. This is a challenge. It's some caribou there up by the pipeline. I'll go to the next clip, Michelle, I think, if you can. This was last week up by Pump Station 1. It's grizzly. When I flew down on, I guess it was Thursday, to 4, I saw 3 grizzlies up. I saw muskox. One of the grizzlies was a blonde grizzly. I'd never seen one before. Kind of brownish feet and a light color. But they're around our system all the time. We pay a lot of attention to them. And this is one of those challenges you're going to have to help us solve, right? And it goes to a lot of values too, certainly cultural values. This pipeline that we operate up here, there was a lot of opposition to building it. And the opposition was we were going to destroy the caribou, we were going to trash the bears, we were going to kill the whales. It didn't happen. It didn't happen for a lot of reasons, but a lot of effort. I think, and this is unfortunate, a lot of the debates today get framed in either ors. We can either have a clean ocean or we can have economic activity and development, whether it's shipping or transit or oil and gas or mining or tourism. Any kind of activity is immediately in conflict. I don't believe that. It takes a lot of effort to resolve those conflicts safely. And what I want to offer to you is a lot of the work you do is critical to that. Critical to being able to say, we can have economic opportunity, we can have economic activity, and we can still preserve the oceans, the life in the oceans, the life on the land in ways that allow that wildlife to survive, to be sustainable, and even to thrive. The caribou herd where we operate is larger by a factor of about 3 times, at least 3 times, than it was before we started operation. I won't go into all the reasons for that, but we pay a lot of attention to that. This is our oil spill response operation training down in Prince William Sound, SERVS, Ship Escort Response System. It's one of the best in the world. What I wanted to point out to you, go to the next clip, Michelle. Okay, so there was a lot of friction. Now Shell is pulled out of offshore in the Chukchi, but they train for pollution response with our people, our equipment in Prince William Sound, because we're good at what we do, whether it's along the pipeline. It's an enormous effort, it's an enormous investment. It's never perfect. I also, get asked about this a lot. There's no risk to anything we do, I know that. Every day I live in a world, and our people live in a world where there's a threat to life safety, there's a threat to the environment. From a business point of view, there's a threat to reliability. And we focus intently on quantifying and analyzing and addressing those risks. But we're not naive about them, but they're always there. But our goal is to manage them so that you can have both. You can have economic development. The impact on the state is enormous if we're out of business. I think the numbers would say we put about, the industry now, about $162 or $165 billion into the state of Alaska pockets over the last 40 years. We've been in business 40 years. But that's an issue that needs to be reconciled. And I'm kind of going to ask, when you're doing your work,
That's really what I'm looking for. I'm looking for ways to operate safely, to manage that safely. Whether it's, like I said, shipping has already taken place, right? It's going on out there. If you look at, risk is a lot of likelihood and consequence. Well, I know I'm a big consequence if I have a bad day. On the other hand, the likelihood issue, I think it's in shipping. You're much more likely to have those kind of events up there because there's a lot more of it going on. We're on the land. And it's tough, but reconciling that. So, and that's the shell rig that we were training for, is out in the Chuck Sea. Can you have that safely? Can you balance that activity safely? That's a challenge. I stand in the camp of saying you can, but I'm conscious of the fact there's always risk. I'm conscious of the fact you have to be attentive to the risk, and we need your help, because you can't manage a risk you don't understand, right? So a lot of the work of science and engineering is to understand the risks and then drive solutions to them, and that's where you come in. Energy, there's opportunity out there, and opportunity is a benefit not just to our companies and the people we work. I mean, there are thousands and thousands of jobs in this state that depend on the oil and gas industry, which kind of is where I work now, depend on government, depend on the Coast Guard, right, to do their job. So it's opportunity. Are there ways to reconcile that opportunity and the benefits that it brings both to the state, to the people that live here, and to the nation, with the goal of protecting and sustaining the life in the oceans and the life on the lands in the Arctic? I think there are, but we won't get there if we don't understand better what's going on. I just wanted to set up this slide because I want to talk about what I've learned over the years and then wrap up. But these are some of our people. I'm going to tell you that it's all about people. We get performance through people. The picture on the left, we're laying some pipe. We had to put a bypass in a couple of years ago, and we had an incident up at Pump Station 1. And it doesn't look it, but that's 30 below, okay? And your welders, your fitters out of Fairbanks did 20 field welds, 22 actually. Every one of them passed X-ray the first time in conditions that approached 30 below. We put tents up after this and heated it and everything, but that's pretty good grit to be able to do that. Take a lot of pride in that. People carry us. We're having to, because we're declining throughput, we have to run a lot more scraper pigs to get the wax off the pipe walls so we don't set up corrosion. It's a gritty, tough, dirty job. Pay people very well, but we depend on people. As smart as our technology is, and we leverage it a lot, trying to leverage more. I'd like to see more drone activity. We're working with the FAA on that issue right now. It would make us a safer, more reliable activity, I think. It's going to come down to people, whether it's people that live up there or people that work there. All right, so here's what I wanted to give you some thoughts about. And it's just, if you're in that space, if you're in the Arctic, whether you're doing research or whether you're a government agent and you're trying to oversee some activity, or whether you're like us and you're a producer or a pipeline operator or a logistician and you're trying to operate up here. These are some of the things that jumped out to me. I'll tell you a couple of stories from the Coast Guard. So Coast Guard is, if you know, the service motto is Semper Paratus, always ready, okay? And the bottom line is, when stuff happens, it's too late to get ready, okay? Performance always walks back to people. And then I want to talk about stern chases, because I'm hoping you will help me solve what I see as the stern chase up here these days. Okay, so preparation equals performance, Semper Paratus. So there's a degree of difficulty in the Arctic that exceeds anything I've seen elsewhere. Now, we have hurricanes, and tragic hurricanes, most recently down in Texas and Florida, and you got another one coming in over the next week. But they're more predictable. We are confronted more often with things that are surprising. Earthquake shows up here today, it's going to show up. It's going to come unannounced, and you better be ready to deal with it. If we have an incident on our system, it's going to happen. If we have a flood, it's going to happen. They're not entirely predictable. That's Alaska being Alaska. But what do you need? You need capable equipment. It needs to be well maintained. You need well-trained people, and they need to be in place where they can react and respond. Now, in place for me means I've got crews 7x24 at a bunch of places along our system, including up at one. With the Coast Guard, it means we've got a crew at, say, an air station at Kodiak that are trained and ready to go. And they've got the ability to get out and operate in the worst conditions and do their job, right? Accomplish their mission. Whether it's law enforcement or whether it's search and rescue or whether it's pretty much anything in their suite, environmental protection or environmental response. But I'm telling you, if you're ready, you know, in life, right, you all face this, right? Are you ready for your next challenge? You can get you need the education, you need the training, you need the development. Sometimes opportunity doesn't walk in your door. You're ready. You're ready for that greater responsibility. You're ready for that next job. But it doesn't happen. It doesn't walk in for you. You can be not ready, and then when stuff happens, it's a disaster. You're just not ready for it. You're going to fail. Your organization is going to fail. Your operation is going to fail. When you have readiness and then something happens, that's when you succeed. I just take a lot of pride in my Coast Guard heritage, but if you look down at Houston or when Katrina happened, thousands and thousands of lives saved because we had helicopter crews we pulled from all over the country that were ready and knew how to pull people up off the ground. And Air Guard out here does the same thing. So, but that readiness issue is always on my mind. And I'm telling you, when you go out into the neighborhood, I'm thinking research, you had a young woman killed by a bear up at one of the mining sites north of Fairbanks this year. Experienced employee. That's an extreme example, but it happens. And you need to be ready. You need to be able to deal with that. I worry about, we have issues with public access on the Hall Road, which is open to public access. Literally, I mean, I'm looking at this bicyclist the other day, and the weather once you got into the pass was miserable. Muddy, wet, cold, wet snow, dangerous. There is no help up there, right? But ready, you need to be. So for a scientist, what does ready mean, right? What does that mean for you? Are you ready to get the results you need from research or whatever? But that's a big issue for me. And the degree of difficulty, if you're operating, if we put instruments up, maintaining them is tough. ATT, I know, has trouble getting to a high site if they have a microwave failure. If one of their towers goes down and it's February and the wind's blowing at 60 knots and it's 20 below, you're not going to get in with the helicopter. It's just not happening. You better be prepared for that. But think about that. What is ready? When I was with the Coast Guard, are you ready for sea? A lot of life lost in Alaska is people who are not ready for sea. It's when you leave the dock, you need to be ready. Not when you get out in the weather and you find out you've got a leaking stern tube. It's that kind of, but that readiness issue, that preparation issue should infuse anything you do. And when we've been successful, it's because of that. And when we've had challenges, it's because we weren't quite as ready as we thought we were. Second piece of that is up in the Arctic, there's no backup. You're it. What you can, you're the turtle. Whatever you have to deal with whatever you're doing, you better bring it in because there's not much of a lifeline. Alaska has the huge distances, the limited infrastructure, and Alaska weather being Alaska. I had a case when I was with the Coast Guard. This is about 2002. Dick Rutan, aviation pioneer, was doing a trans-polar flight to Norway and back in a Russian trimotor. 2 planes, actually, a trimotor, and he had a chase. They sat down to check out the North Pole, and the airplane wheels punched through the ice. So now you've got 5 people actually, down at the North Pole. And that area they were in was in the U.S. under the SAR treaties, international treaties. It was our responsibility, ours being the United States and the United States Coast Guard being the operator, to see what we could do. They were not injured, and they had some Arctic clothing, even though it was summer. I had no way to get them out. So what are we going to do? Well, we're going to launch, phase up C-130s, fly them up north, funnel up helicopter crews, funnel up extra fuel. There was ice, so we didn't have any icebreaker up there. Coast Guard, we don't have icebreakers as a nation to the extent you need it if you really want to play in that pond. Had no way to get them. You know who got them? Through connections with the Canadians. They had a Twin Otter on skis. And so a Canadian aircraft went up, picked them up, got them out with no problem. So one of those other lessons is there's no backup unless you got friends around, right? So you get that stakeholder relationship, that friendship, that knowledge that comes from other people. But there's a very, very high, if you got kids who are swimmer, you score, you watch it in the Olympics, they score degrees of difficulties on the dives. A very high degree of difficulty up here. So when you're talking about being ready, you really need to be ready for an environment that just challenging. We'll leave it at that. Okay, so I've always found that you succeed or fail with your people, with the people you work with, and the people you engage with, and the people who you depend on. You've got, and you talked about the stakeholder engagement and the relationships earlier. You got to have that, because it's too late to build them when you have a problem or you have a need. We pay a lot of attention to other people that live in the Arctic, but also people that we work with, our supply chain, our logistics. It's amazing to me that people get lost, and we're leveraging technology. We're like everybody else. We're increasingly automated. We're increasingly reliant on technology. But at the end of the day, the person who's probably going to put, whether they're sitting in a control room for me, or whether they're out at a pump station, or whether they're a security guard that's watching something up at pump station 3, people. And so what does that mean? It means capable people. It means people that know their jobs, they're professional about the way they do them. Our highest priorities as a company are life safety. That means nobody gets hurt, everybody goes home. It means that environment comes right behind it. Our system integrity is right up there. And then the third thing is our reliability. And we won't budge on them, but the people thing comes first. And I tell the folks we work with, I'm just saying this when you go out there, if you're out there, I have been fortunate in a Coast Guard career to have some of the most elating days you'll ever have in your life when you have saves, right? And on the other hand, some of the most toughest days in your life when you're telling some mother that you're not bringing her son back alive, that you're shutting down a search, or that I use that example. But it's hard. I don't want that. But if you're in this environment, I have a story. I'll divert. I think I'm okay on time. But who your friends are. Like, Canadians helped us go get it. We had one of those elation days, saved 6 Russian natives who had come over to trade. This is before 9/11, before you had all the rules about who couldn't go anywhere. And we headed back to Russia in a storm, in open skiffs across the Bering Strait, and north of the Bering Strait, actually. And they got caught in a storm. One boat was caught, capsized, 2 people lost. The boats got broken up. I think there were about 12 or 14 of them, and maybe it was 12. And they got in. We got reports of the boats coming in, and they said there were 3 boats missing, 6 people. Well, under the International Convention, we get to search our side of the line, and this is over toward Russian waters. They get to search their side, and they can help us and we can help them, but they have to ask, right? You don't go in and do stuff in other people's sovereign territory, whether it's airspace or water, without permission. So we search all areas. Our search model suggested the boats, if they were still afloat, were in Russian waters. Searched for a couple of days and we're shutting down, we're out, and we didn't have permission to go in. And we also knew, we actually had somebody over there, an Alaskan, happened to be over doing anthropology work in one of the villages. We knew the Russians weren't turning a rotor, and they were telling us, oh yeah, we're looking. You look your side, we'll look our side. We got everything going. We knew nothing was going on. And after 3 days, I got a call from my compadre. He said, well, Moscow is now giving us permission to let you help us. So we got exhausted, but we went out there, and son of a gun, we found these people where we thought they might be. They were dehydrated, near death, but alive, and all 6 survived. And you know, the lesson, my takeaway there was, well, Arctic smarts sometimes means knowing who your friends are and who you can really count on in a push. But life safety is a huge issue. Bias for action, we want people that, you have to be able to get out and fix that line. You have to be able to do it safely. But if you're going to sit at the dock, you're not going to be successful in the Arctic. There's lessons with the natives have been there for 10,000 years. Uktiavik, you know, it's you're not going to get the whale if you don't go out. You know, it's a different world. True grit. You know, I call it Alaska true grit. You got to be able to be tough. you got to be equipped, you got to be trained, you got to be ready. I was telling one of our guys, so this is just us, right, as a company. After October 1st, if you go north of the Arctic Circle, everybody has to carry Arctic gear, right? The heavy parkers, the helmets, the bunny boots, all that kind of stuff. You can't go. That's October, it's not that bad. Well, if you're in the Brooks, it can be that bad. And if you get stuck out there and you don't have any help for a day or two, you're really stuck. And we have had that scenario come up, not often, but it's kind of that, you got to be gritty, but you got to not be stupid. This is what I really want to talk about, Michelle. Don't get in a stern chase. And this is where I'm looking for your help, right? So my lesson over many years for many reasons, and it's particularly applicable up here, when anything happens, you got to go, you got to overreact. And that's our operating philosophy. It's my operating philosophy. You get everything you got that can help solve that problem going. You move it. It's real easy to pull something back if it turns out you don't need an extra helicopter if I'm the Coast Guard. For me, if I don't need extra welders, if I don't need a backup crew. But if we're in a dicey situation, we start moving everything and we try and get ahead of it. You know, a stern chase, you have to say, I feel embarrassed. You're much more of a sailor than I am, even though I spent all that time in the Coast Guard, you know. Stern chase is one vessel, you know, going back to something, chasing a vessel from behind. And it's a long chase. It's not really what you want to do. You want to cut something off, right? So stern chase is you're behind and you're trying to catch up with something. In Alaska, if you get in the stern chase, it will get away from you. You can almost guarantee it. The weather will shut you down. The fog will roll in. The wind will kick up. Or your supply chain will have a problem because of a storm in Houston or whatever. But I'm offering to you that if you're involved in any kind of operational activity here, you need to be fully prepared to overreact. And there's a price to that, but the consequence is a lot worse. And if it turns out you don't need all that stuff, we had conversations with some of the operators up here for the Chukchi, and certainly you'll see it with our operators. We did a not a massive drill. We just did a drill here a couple of weeks ago, 2 weeks ago on a Tanana, 180 people to roll out some. Why? Want to make sure that and government agencies involved, about 35 individuals, to make sure that we can roll out everything we need if we have an incident. But we're overreacting, and but we are. But you need to be able to do that. The lesson too is just don't forget your people when you do that. That's what's been going on down, say, Houston. Your own people are going to be impacted by events, right? But you want to overreact. Now, here's where I think the issue for you is. The knowledge base for the Arctic is not what I think it needs to be to understand the ocean, to understand the fragility of it, to understand the currents, to understand the winds, to understand the melting ice and the rate it's melting and the implications of all that. And I think we're honestly, Coast Guard say we don't have icebreakers. Russia, China's got near Arctic nations like China, near Arctic nations, they're calling themselves. We're up here, we're in a bit of a stern chase. And I think we're in a bit of a stern chase on science. And it's not because of lack of effort, maybe because of lack of resources. But that's not a good position to be in if we really want to succeed with being to have both, right? Have the economic opportunity, the economic development, and protect that fragile ocean with the life that's in it. I think when you go through your meetings for the next day or two and you're thinking about stuff, I mean, we're very supportive of the education system in the state. University, we partner a lot with the UAF, like I said, with the STEM programs. We need the people, we need the talent, we need the development. But I think we need as a community, and I'm not speaking for anybody other than myself here, we need to invest in those universities, and we need to invest in the science, and we need to invest in science. I call it applied science. Some of the research can get, you know it better than I do, a little academic, but when it starts to move toward things that are meaningful to people like me who are operators, it's crucially important that we get it right. And so as you think about your work, whether it's got to do with any of the things I mentioned or how we respond, it's important we get it right. So that's us. We had a bunch of people that built this pipeline that didn't know it couldn't get done. I guess what I'm asking you is I think you can have both. It's not either or if we put our shoulder to the wheel and collectively push it forward. So thanks very much. I'm glad to be with you.